Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be part 38, the second half to chapter 23. The group of heroes and hero students charged down the hallway. Irinaka is quite a bit farther up now, Izuku stated, glancing up as if he could see through the ceiling to where the villain was hidden in a wall. The walls and ground aren't moving anymore either, Aizawa answered, running beside Izuku. We're on the same floor as Eri now, too, Izuku said, his gaze shifting to the wall on his right. They're close. Do not run off on your own, Aizawa hissed down to Izuku. Izuku's skin tingled, one for all pulsing at the surface, desperate for release. He could feel Eri so close. He imagined how scared she was with everything that was going on. Izuku wasn't going to run off, though. He knew better than that. But he didn't get the chance to say that to Aizawa, as a jagged pillar erupted from the wall and slammed into them both. Izuku was knocked out of the way along with Aizawa, and he fell on top of him, immediately rolling off to kick at the pillar. It exploded, but it was too late. Both Kirishima and Fat Gum were gone, having pushed them out of the way and taken the hit for them. Irinaka is close again. Izuku's head swiveled. There. Izuku leapt up, swiveling to direct a hard kick into the wall opposite him, where he felt a presence watching them. The wall burst apart, and Izuku reached in through the debris to grab the villain, keeping one finger up as his hand closed around the man's bicep. He was not putting him into his mindscape. He wasn't going to let himself be destroyed or exhausted before he even got a chance to see Eri. From below, Aizawa erased Mimic as soon as he was in sight. Izuku grabbed the villain and propelled them off of a piece of the wall to body slam the much larger man into the ground, face first. Aizawa leapt forward, tying the now unconscious villain up as Izuku moved out of the way, catching his breath. Good initiative, Aizawa complimented gruffly, finishing up the tying. Izuku suddenly gasped, turning rapidly to dodge a knife lying at his unprotected back. Aizawa looked up to see what seemed like Izuku attacking himself. He instinctively used his quirk on them both in rapid succession, until the skin seemed to fall away from the second one, revealing the naked form of Toga. That wasn't good. Aizawa kept his eyes focused on the girl as she attacked Izuku, watching him recover from his shock at seeing her as he dodged knife attacks, the heroes behind them rushing to their aid. "Fuck you!" Izuku screamed, lashing out with a sparking fist, colliding with the girl's face. She slammed into the wall and collapsed, knocked out completely. Izuku dropped to his knees beside her, face twisted into an angry scowl as he pulled capture tape from his belt, binding the girl up after checking to make sure she was still alive after a hit like that to the head, and then the subsequent smash into the wall. The League is here. Aizawa frowned. Why would she attack like that out of nowhere? Rocklock wondered out loud from behind Aizawa. She's obsessed with me, Izuku growled in answer, tightening the tape almost enough to cut off all the circulation in the girl's hands. Something abruptly slammed into Izuku, and he was flung backward, Aizawa catching him with his capture weapon. A man in a skin-tight suit Izuku recognized as Twice fell out of a vent, scooping up the unconscious girl and carrying her away at a rapid pace in the opposite direction of the way they needed to be going. Izuku stood back up, his teeth grinding in anger. He'd been so affected by Toga being there that he hadn't even noticed Twice approaching. He was so pathetic. "Are you okay, Nova?" Aizawa asked softly, still crouched by Irinaka, as he released Izuku. "I will be after we get Eri," he answered stiffly, swiping a hand down his face. "Let's get going. We don't have time to go after Toga." They ran, a group of heroes to save a little girl, Izuku busting down wall after wall to get to their destination. Nothing would stand in their way, not even fear itself. "Last wall!" Izuku shouted in warning to the rest of the heroes before throwing himself forward, his fist decimating the wall in front of them. He launched himself forward, catching sight of a bloodied, exhausted, and relieved expression from Tokuda, and of the little white-haired girl behind him. Several other bodies were scattered around, all people in masks, part of Overhaul's inner circle. Tokuda had been busy. Chisaki was in front of him, and Izuku was fast, fingers outstretched to send the monster into his mindscape. At the last second, Chisaki dodged, but Izuku threw up his leg in a ferocious kick that catapulted the villain into the opposite wall. Izuku landed as Rocklock and Night Eye rushed forward to secure the downed villains and Tokuda and Eri, Aizawa moving to Izuku's side. "Remain vigilant. Keep pressing him," Aizawa whispered to him, Overhaul attempting to use his quirk in front of them. "And stay close." Izuku didn't answer. He wasn't going to promise to stay close when he didn't plan on doing anything of the sort. He wanted to make this piece of shit hurt. Izuku and Aizawa flew forward, Overhaul screaming for aid from his lackeys. Izuku whirled, mid-jump, just as Rocklock leapt in front of a projectile that was going straight at Izuku. It pierced the man's shoulder, and he cried out. A breath hissed between his teeth as he skidded to a stop. "Go help him! I've got this!" Izuku told Aizawa, not giving his guardian a chance to argue as he used One for All to propel himself forward, directing another kick at Overhaul, ducking under his own attack. "Nova, watch out!" Aizawa cried out, and Izuku dodged to the side just as the villain's quirk returned to him, and he slapped a hand against the ground. Concrete spikes shot out of the ground, one of them slicing Izuku's bicep, and another tearing his pant leg, cutting into his calf. Izuku stumbled to the side, ducking under a spike that sailed past his head, nearly decapitating him. Aizawa had only blinked once and so much had happened, and now he'd lost visual with the villain. Overhaul was hiding behind several layers of concrete spikes, forming a wall to mask whatever he was doing. "He stole one of his lackeys," Aizawa shouted to Izuku through the maze of spikes. He'd seen a body fall past the wall. He had a bad idea of what Chisaki planned on doing with the member of his inner circle, based on what they knew of his quirk, based on what he'd done to Izuku. Who was to say that the man couldn't fuse with someone else? A column of light shot upward from behind the wall, air spiraling around it like a tornado, disrupting and destroying some of the spikes surrounding the area. The white light was bright, a monolithic blaze of intensity. "I'll acknowledge with dignity that you were stronger than me, Lemillion." A loud, twisted voice vibrated through the room, deep and dangerous. A shudder ran down Izuku's spine as he watched more of the spikes be destroyed. Izuku glanced back at his teacher, helping Rocklock after defeating the villain called Kronos. He still didn't have a line of sight to Overhaul. "Now, I'll have you return Eri to me." Grimacing, Izuku turned back to face the chaos happening in front of him, his hand dropping from where it had been holding his arm. Blood soaked into his jacket as he considered a plan to take out the spikes blocking Aizawa's vision. Night Eye was protecting Tokuda and Eri. Aizawa was dragging Rocklock out of the way while also keeping an eye on Izuku. The light had dissipated, showing a monster-like version of Overhaul. Huge clawed arms stretched from his back, while his own were grown and warped. Long claws tipped each finger from large reddened hands. All of his injuries were gone. His face was interlaced with black, and his eyes were narrowed as they caught sight of Izuku, preparing to jump. Behind him, Aizawa was approaching them as silently as possible, trying to get a good angle to use his quirk on Overhaul. And then everything went sideways. Overhaul slammed his hands against the ground, and the ground contorted beneath Izuku, throwing him backward, causing him to drop into a split to narrowly avoid being impaled on a spike. Then there was a sound that would forever echo through Izuku's mind. Aizawa screamed. Izuku's head shot up, all the breath leaving his body as he saw Aizawa being slammed against a wall, his head bouncing off of it, pinned by a narrow spike going through his right shoulder. Izuku watched as the man's chin dropped against his chest, his body going lax as he lost consciousness. Time seemed to stop, everything around Izuku coming into hyper-focus as the world went awash with a sharp clarity he had never seen before. His green eyes glowed as he stood fluidly, someone behind him shouting his name without him noticing. Izuku shot forward like a bullet, aiming for Overhaul as lava rain pelted the ground around him, a protective bubble around his body, as he sent the cascade at the villain, showering his body in pure lava. Chisaki shrieked in anger and pain, remaking his body again and again as Izuku crashed into him. Their tangled forms went rolling, separating when Chisaki sent a pillar into his chest, rocketing him into the wall, the back of his head connecting with concrete. He knelt in a desiccated landscape of damaged, broken earth. Black tornadoes, flickering with green lightning throughout their darkness, ravaged the land while stinging rain assailed his face. Trees of mangled skeletons were uprooted from the ground and flung through the air by the spinning funnel clouds and tornadoes as the din of rattling chains and the screams of the damned broke past even the sounds of the raging storm. Izuku screamed as he hit the ground, jarring him back to the present. He had to stay conscious. He couldn't pass out, for Eri's sake. At some point his braids had come undone, and his hair flared around his head before he kicked off the ground, annihilating the pillars that dared try to stop him. He threw a fist out, but had to drop low to avoid Chisaki's hand. No matter what, he could not allow himself to be touched. That would be the end of it. He had no doubt that one hand on him would mean certain, permanent death. Overhaul tried to get past Izuku to get to where Night Eye was half dragging Tokuda and carrying Eri out of the hole Izuku had first created. Aizawa still hung from the wall, pinned, as blood dropped to the floor. When he glanced back, Izuku had been able to see Eri's aura, how blindingly white it was, overtaking Night Eye's and Tokuda's. She was so scared. Izuku would take that fear away. He had to. "You will not get her!" Izuku yelled, throwing himself into the fray of concrete and the villain, hurling a fist forward to connect with Overhaul's face, his bracer and the medicine it held exploding apart from the impact. Overhaul reeled back from the force of the hit and reached for Izuku, who slipped to the side and kicked out, connecting with the back of a knee before he jumped out of the way of one of his sharp appendages. He missed the third one when the villain turned swiftly, and it slammed into his side, throwing him back, pain blacking out his mind as spikes tore into his body. Izuku stood on strong legs, wind whipping his unkempt hair about his face. He took heavy steps forward, crimson flowers erupting from the earth where his bare feet were placed, and then dying just as he stepped away. The gusts of wind picked up. The rain turned to hail, scraping his skin and tearing at his clothes. His mind was trying to stop him. The ceiling ruptured above him, a dragon figure slamming the villain that had crashed through the front entrance in the beginning into the ground, shaking the underground all around him. Izuku could see Ochako and Sue landing next to Ryuku. They all looked horrible. "Get a racer!" Izuku yelled to them, forcing his attention back to Chisaki. "Someone is about to die because of you," Chisaki yelled. "Is that what you want, Eri?" Izuku yanked himself up, ripping spikes out of his thigh and then his calf and sending them at Chisaki like spears. From behind, Izuku could feel Eri breaking free of Night Eye's grasp and running toward them. "No, stay back!" Izuku yelled, calling back his lava rain just in case. I don't want anyone to die. Eri's tear-filled voice cried from behind Izuku, and Izuku's face twisted with rage, his soul demanding vengeance against the villain for making her cry. He had to get Overhaul out of here. Izuku glanced back once quickly at Eri, his features dissolving into a soft smile. "It's all right, Eri," he said, hoping that she could hear him over the sound of his lightning, and with how far away she was, still at the hole he'd put in the wall. "I'm going to rescue you. Everything is going to be okay." In the moment that Izuku had looked away, Overhaul had found the body of the massive villain Ryuku had carried through the hole in the ceiling, and as Izuku turned back around, he saw the man lay his hand against the other villain's arm, dissolving him into nothing, to take his power into his own body. Izuku continued walking forward until he came to a stop in front of a massive structure, dark and imposing. Thunder ripped apart the sky and lightning broke the ground next to him into gravity-defying chunks. Taking a deep breath before kicking off the ground, Izuku aimed for Overhaul as the villain began to transform into something even more monstrous than before, a red, iron-smelling mist permeating the air around him. Izuku ignored his pain and the idea of what the mist was, landing an uppercut into the villain's chest that was hard enough to blast him upward, shooting his mutated mass straight through the hole in the ceiling. Izuku looked back one last time. Night Eye, blood running down his face from a new injury, had returned and was crouched in front of Eri, holding on to her, while Ochako and Sue got Aizawa down. "Keep her safe," Izuku said, his voice low and assertive. "I've got some kneecaps to smash." And with that, Izuku leapt upward, the pillar he'd been on flying apart with the force of his jump. Overhaul was high in the air, descending rapidly with his fully transformed body, and it was a mess. Overhaul was now part of a massive body, his torso sticking out from the front of it like a hangnail off a toe. He looked like some sort of demon, countless legs stretching out from a spider-like thorax. Despite having so many legs, Izuku could not seem to see any kneecaps. Overhaul's dark, fleshy mass blocked out the sun as Izuku torpedoed toward him, driving his clenched fist into his face, ripping his mask into pieces. The man screamed, his voice corrupted and deep, warped like his red, monstrous body. A colossal arm slammed into Izuku's body, driving him toward the earth at a pace too fast to control. Izuku impacted the ground hard enough to break it. The cage was an opaque black. Cracks decorated its surface that oozed with a viscous crimson liquid. Offhandedly, Izuku noted that there were more cracks in it now than there had been when he'd first seen it in his dream. He wondered if there had been any cracks in it when Yagi and Gran had seen it. The cage was tall, seeming to stretch at least 50 meters high. It was wrapped thoroughly in chains as wide as a tree trunk, crisscrossing over the entire structure, and it radiated the feeling of homicidal danger. It was like Stain's murderous intent times 1,000,000. Every cell in Izuku's body was telling him to run. Even his mindscape itself was trying to drive him back with buffeting wind and painful hail. Izuku ignored all of it, knowing this was something he needed to do. He could feel it all. He took one last step forward and laid a palm gently against the hot metal of the cage. Steam rose up where it touched his skin, and the chains began vibrating. A feeling of impending doom washing over the entire area. The cage gave one violent shudder before erupting outward. Izuku's eyes snapped open, glowing red orbs highlighted with flickers of green, as if lightning was shooting through his sclera. Overhaul landed in front of him, the ground spider webbing with cracks around him as Izuku lifted in the air. His hair floated around his head, undone from their braids as his body raised higher, hovering over the ground as the sky darkened above them, storm clouds drawing in. Bright green lightning struck the pavement nearby, leaving a smoldering black hole in the ground as the air seemed to drop into almost freezing territory. Darkness gathered as curtains of rain began falling, sheets of it hitting the ground as shadows grew despite there being no sunlight to cause shadows in the first place. Medicine bottles fell along with the rain, clattering and tumbling underneath Izuku before dissolving into mush. Things began to climb from the thick shadows, rotting, skinless monsters pulling themselves out as the ground cracked and formed deep crevices. Both ice and black fire erupted from nowhere all around as the monsters charged at Overhaul, moaning and shrieking. The monsters screamed in hundreds of inhuman voices, the air reverberating with their screeching calls of pure, guttural agony. Around them plants grew and died in rapid succession. The air was thick with desolation and fear, hatred and turmoil. All of the negative emotions that Izuku had ever felt, all the hurt he had gone through, were now released into the world. He'd opened the Pandora's box of his own mental illness and trauma. And this part of the world was shattering. Izuku could no longer feel things, black tendrils shooting from his body toward Overhaul from where he floated, forming dangerous, barbed whips that pierced through the villain's flesh. Izuku couldn't feel his body, his emotions. Everything was nothing except for the sole drive to protect Eri. The monsters began taking on shapes, distorted memories of people. Izuku's father, Toga, Shigaraki, Bakugo, Izuku's mother, Dabi, just about every person from every class that Izuku had ever been in. All for one. Overhaul howled with rage, knocking aside all the skinless monsters with a wide swipe of a bloody appendage before darting toward Izuku. Izuku lifted a hand, and the whips that still penetrated the villain's body knocked him aside. Overhaul put a hand to his own chest, his expression infuriated as he remade himself. Izuku only sent the detached whips right back where they were. "Eri is mine!" Overhaul screamed, ripping whips out of himself and sweeping clamoring monsters away. "Everyone that touches her is rewound into nothingness. That girl is cursed. Just give up!" He jerked forward, lashing out at Izuku, who dropped to the side, his body shaking with all the stress it was going through. Izuku opened his mouth to respond, just as a shrill scream pierced the cacophonous noise already going on around them. It was the terrified scream of a little girl. Overhaul whirled around, his entire body moving too quickly for what should have been possible at that size. And then Izuku was flying forward, low across the ground toward the small child running toward him. Behind her, a myriad of injured and incapacitated heroes were looking on in absolute horror, completely frozen by Izuku's overgrown aura of pain. Eri was the only one seemingly unaffected, and Izuku cursed, wishing someone could have just fucking held on to her. Izuku threw himself ahead, wind screaming past his ears. He used the whips that he'd managed to reattach to Overhaul to pull himself ahead of the demon-like man. Eri was sobbing, tears flowing from her eyes in steady streams, despite everything that was going on, despite all the horrible emotions twisting the air. Izuku's stomach clenched at the sight of the little girl crying. Izuku wrapped an arm around the girl's waist, slinging her up against his chest. Overhaul was right behind him, and a harsh impact into his back sent him straight up into the air. Izuku couldn't feel his body, or the pain that was surely tearing through it, but he knew that something was going on. Something was happening to him. And Eri's horn was glowing, glistening drops of pure light coursing out of it to fall away as Izuku and Eri descended back toward the ground. Overhaul rose up to meet him, hitting him again. Izuku screamed in rage, a brilliant green light surrounding his entire body, and the girl cradled to his chest as the villain burst into black flames. Eri was mumbling against him, words he could barely hear, telling him to give her up, Let her go back. She didn't want to kill anyone else. Izuku glanced down at Eri, forcing his descent to slow, float helping still them in place. He lifted his free hand and smoothed soft hair away from her face. "Everything is going to be okay, Eri," he murmured. "I'm not going to die, and you're not going back to that piece of flaming crap." Overhaul had healed himself from where he had dropped to the ground and had launched himself back up toward Izuku, reaching out a hand tipped with sharp talons that ripped straight through Izuku's leg while he howled. "You don't know Eri's value. A little shit like you could never exploit an asset like her." Hissing in anger, Izuku wrenched himself away, kicking his other leg out to slam against the villain's warped appendage. Exploit. Asset. Another limb smashed toward Izuku, and he could only react in enough time to turn and shield Eri, the impact against his side causing him to soar toward the scorched earth. Izuku slowed down enough so as not to harm Eri, her quirk working on overdrive to heal all the damage he was taking. Izuku rolled to the side when Overhaul came screaming back to the ground straight at him. The villain slammed into the pavement, the impact throwing Izuku into the air. Eri tearing from his grip as Izuku cried out. Izuku's body moved on its own as Overhaul reached out for Eri's falling body, and he stretched a palm out, doing what he knew he shouldn't. What he knew would hurt. Izuku slapped a hand against a limb as it swung on a backward arc, and Overhaul was wrenched off this plane of existence with the sound of a jet engine taking off. He never sent anything so huge into his mindscape before. Izuku stumbled, eyes wide, lightning flickering around him as he glanced back toward the heroes. He met the faraway, dark, terrified eyes of his guardian as Sue cradled him against her chest. Izuku turned back to where Eri had fallen, moving to extend a hand toward her. But every muscle in Izuku's body gave out, and he collapsed face first into the ground, his eyes closing. And then snapping open. Izuku knew immediately that he was in his mindscape. His mind was an utter mess, Overhaul destroying everything. Izuku sat and watched for a second in a field of decaying white chrysanthemums while he wondered what he should do. The sky was burning with fire and buildings flew through the air, broken and falling into pieces. Dark, crimson globules floated all around, gravity non-existent. The ground itself was squishy and gave way when Izuku stood, his feet sinking into it. He decided to just act. This was his mind. He could do whatever the fuck he wanted. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice booming through the air, coming from every direction at once. "Hey over, bitch!" Izuku was a missile, sliding through the thick air like a katana into muscular. Overhaul looked up from where he'd been annihilating his mindscape, miles in every direction obliterated. There was no ground anymore, only a floating space of 16 years of raw torment and destruction. Izuku's fist collided with a face covered in hives, and Overhaul went flying, plummeting downward. Or maybe it was up. It didn't matter anymore. Overhaul came back with an angry roar, smashing into Izuku's form and slamming him through a fragmented section of what looked like the UA-class's building. Izuku became a flash of light, zipping around the villain to plant hit after hit into his body, bones exploding, muscles snapping. Overhaul snatched him out of midair, and Izuku felt no pain, no anger, only cold and calculative, as Overhaul forced his form through building after broken building. He knew he could send Overhaul back. He could feel power buzzing at his fingertips through his veins in each strand of his hair. Izuku had never felt so powerful in his life. Despite this, he knew he shouldn't send Overhaul back. He would just go straight for Eri, and Izuku had the feeling his physical body was out of commission, and the rest of the heroes also seemed like they wouldn't be much help. There was only one chance to make sure everyone else got out of this alive. Defeat Overhaul. Here. Now. For good. Izuku slashed outward, a massive chef's knife forming in his hand to slice against Overhaul's chest as he reeled back. "Why won't anyone?" he bellowed, knocking Izuku back and into the Aldera Junior High sign as thunder and lightning cracked around them, fire flaring up in every direction. "Look at the big picture!" Overhaul's body undid itself, spiraling out in an attempt to reform whole and complete again, uninjured from Izuku's attacks. From where he lay, sprawling against the sign, Izuku remembered one of the events he'd done with his class recently. Baseball. He remembered storing everything in his Mindscape and specifically forgetting some stuff inside, just in case. You never knew what you could need. A hefty wooden bat formed in Izuku's hand, and he lifted his form, feet flat against the metal of the sign before he went shooting forward, straight into the mess of the reforming body. Izuku threw his grip out, the hard wood of the bat cracking against unprotected kneecaps, smashing them in like rotten pumpkins. Izuku landed on another sign and, like Gran, immediately propelled himself off of it and toward the villain. Overhaul reformed a long limb, faster than Izuku thought was possible, and wrapped it around Izuku's throat. Izuku's back connected with something, his throat constricting. Fortunately, Izuku's body was completely constructed by his own mind, and there was no need for him to breathe. "I'm going to tear down this entire world. I'm going to reduce it to its very framework." Overhaul growled in his face while Izuku blinked lazily at him. "Your justice is small. You only see what's in front of you. It's mere sentimentalism. Hero pretender." Izuku tilted his head, teeth grinding together, slamming his head outward and into Chisaki's skull, knocking him back. Overhaul screamed in anger as Izuku lifted arms up, suddenly laden with heavy metal. "Die, overbitch," he said with a vicious smile, and Overhaul looked up in pure rage, his face transforming into shock when he saw what Izuku held, and then what Izuku wanted to see most: fear. Izuku flipped the big red toggle on the side of the bomb. All right, listeners, this concludes the second half to Chapter 23 of State of Mind. Chapter 24 will be up next. I'm desperately eager to hear what you all thought about this chapter and how things are wrapping up with this Overhaul arc and the ways in which Izuku is carrying out this fight. The fact that the majority of the last part of this battle here is taking place within his own mind, and the fact that the bomb got whipped out at the last second here too. So please drop your thoughts, your reactions, your predictions for what's going to happen next in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And just a reminder, this story is located over on AO3, so if you have an opportunity to slide over, leaving comments, kudos, and support to the original author, I'm sure it's much appreciated. As always, thank you all so much for listening.